So I was talking about pretty much gingers. Like on TikTok, there's this trend where it's like gingers are black. If you see a ginger, that's a black man. But there's a history of gingers where they actually weren't deemed white for the longest, and they were enslaved with black people, and they actually rebelled with black people, brown people. Because I don't like using the term black because it's a social construct, but we'll get to that later. Um, but later on, they were deemed white, um, and they got the privileges that a white person would get, because white people would go by phenotype, so they were no longer deemed inferior because white people would literally, the concept of whiteness changed. It was no longer just brown and blonde hair and certain features. It began to include people who had ginger hair and red hair, and that wasn't deemed to be inferior, although for the longest it was, because the Irish were just heavily mocked and put down and dehumanized. So whenever white people say that white people weren't enslaved, you gotta think they weren't actually deemed white back then. So it's still, the concept of whiteness came with privilege always, always. But yeah, later on, the Irish people had privilege and they assimilated to the white majority and kind of took on some of the character traits of uh, white people who believed in eugenics and inbreeding. And if you wonder, like, why a mixed person who is 70% white and 30% black will still be classified as black and not white, is because white people gatekeep their race. So they don't just allow anyone to assimilate into their race because they're trying to, because the definition of white, like I said, was more about keeping everything pure. In what eugenicists would use, they would use the term breeding out certain traits, not allowing certain traits to be prominent within their sect or within their race, so they can be deemed the superior race and the most adapted, because they believe West Africans were the least adapted, and that monkeys evolved to be West Africans, and then West Africans evolved to be West and North Africans evolved to be white people. So they didn't realize that skin color was just a product of your environment. No, they're like, F that. No, we're the superior race, uh, because our white skin showcases that we're God's favorite, and the people of the dark are more associated with uh, the devil and bad things on the earth. So, I don't know, I'm just yapping, but pretty much they said yeet, and they threw all the Africans, off the slave ships, and they killed a bunch of African people and colonized African people. And whiteness is still gate kept because there is privilege. And if white people actually allowed people who had majority white DNA to identify as white, they wouldn't really be the minority. But so they can continue this minority myth. Like if they included, since white is a social construct, I get the Irish weren't deemed white, but if they included Hispanics as white, which I think now Hispanics are deemed white, people from Spain who are literally white, they just speak Spanish and have Spanish culture. Is because technically, since blackness is a social construct, and anyone who has black skin can, or anyone who's black passing can be deemed black, then it should be the same with whiteness, where anyone from Latin America who is white passing or has majority Portuguese in them in Spanish ancestry, Mexicans who are white passing, Indians who are white passing, because it is just a social construct at the end of the day. It's not genetic at all. It's a 20th century construct. So it makes no sense to categorize people as white based upon like these few select traits that not everyone's going to have, and also by their geographical location. When to be categorized as black, you just have to have, a drop of black blood. And I don't believe in the one drop rule. Because, first of all, we don't live back in the olden times where one drop meant and we don't live where people have the paper brown bag test. Because if that's the case, and we're going based on past perceptions of black people, we should go on past perceptions of white people. And the Irish will no longer be deemed white once again. But we don't. We go based upon how people are perceived nowadays. And people who are racially ambiguous, like when black people make the argument, well, they view us all the same. You're dark, I'm white, you're racially ambiguous, but they just view us all as niggas are black, or they view us all like we're dark. It's like that's not true. White people can differentiate just like black people differentiate, just like Asians differentiate. That's why white that's why white passing women and men are able to assimilate to white groups more easily and are kicked out of black groups oftentimes because race is just about social perception. And it's like your street race. What you're perceived as is what people treat you as. So if you're racially ambiguous, but you're kind of white passing, it could be easier to assimilate with white people. And you are treated differently by both white and black people. So if black people just went, you know, if if black people created their own race, not their own race, but if black people created their own groups and sects based upon features, similar features that black people had, and they called those groups different things. Sure, it would be easier for Europeans to probably conquer and divide black people, but it would bring a better sense of community where there's not this racial hierarchy. Because we're different shades of brown, we have different phenotypes, but since we're all grouped as black together solely based on skin color, that doesn't account for genetic diversity. It makes no sense. That's a concept of the past. It's really outdated. It shouldn't even be here anymore. And because of that, black people are more likely to have division and to, because it's like when you categorize people based on your imperfect mind of what you perceive that they should be, you're not God, but you're playing God. So there's always consequences versus letting each group categorize themselves. Because this whole racial system is what Europeans made. It shouldn't even be here for real. Technically, both Indians and black people should just be called brown. We shouldn't even be called black. Especially with all the negative connotations that are associated with the black color. And I'm getting somewhere here. I'm definitely getting somewhere. And a lot of brown people, because I don't even like to call them black, brown people from Africa, what they believe, we all have different, perceptions. Like some people believe the statue in New York was representation for them, and they're like, wow, I didn't see representation for me, but now I finally see myself. And a lot of black people felt like that statue was promoting obesity, normalizing obesity. Some black people felt like the statue was showing the worst of black women and African women. A lot of African women felt like it was showing the worst of brown women and black women because they feel that if the statue was white, they would show a convincingly attractive white person. They wouldn't show a white person who has a flat ass or a white person who has a Ukrainian, not Ukrainian, but who has a big nose, or a white person who has, you know, built like mashed potatoes, right? But they would show a white woman who has a good figure, kind of like the Statue of Liberty, even though the Statue of Liberty was of a black woman. But with that statue, there's no messaging. It didn't show her holding the weight of the world on her shoulders. Didn't even explain how she got to be in that predicament. They didn't have goddess locks or a hairstyle that would have been more fitting for her. She didn't even have a bra on. And that's supposed to be showcase appreciation of black women. But it looks like the first thing that the artist did was just see watch like Medea movies and think of the first stereotype of what black women are categorized as and created a statue of that image. Like it makes no sense. But yeah.